Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 3 of Unlocking Potential. If you were here for either days 1, 2, or both, welcome back. If you are new here, welcome. Don't worry, we will be reviewing some things that we discussed briefly. And there are replays available of days 1 and 2. Kathleen posted or
Yep,
will post the link in the chat. So for those of you that were here yesterday, do you have any grand takeaways from yesterday? Anything that you want to share from yesterday? I didn't give you a challenge question because we sort of had to change up our agenda because of technology, but do you have any grand takeaways from yesterday?
And Angela, perhaps you could also just do a short recap too. You had such important points yesterday, and then
Right.
we'll jump into our new content. And very important, you have a guest speaker at the bottom of the hour, Dan Hodges.
We do have a guest speaker, and
Daniel.
he is going to talk about disability law and specifically how it applies to small businesses. And it's one of the concerns that people have. Yesterday was pretty much devoted to addressing people's concerns about accessibility. One of the concerns that we addressed is accessibility is expensive. And, you give them their truth, right? It can be expensive, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So if you build accessibility into your processes early, so if you code a website accessibly, for example, at the beginning, building an accessible website is comparable in price to building an inaccessible website. Now you say, Angela, my website's already built. What am I going to do? Okay. So 2 things there. One, start with the most serious errors, right? The errors with the most impact. Fix those first. So you can spread the expense out. You don't have to do everything at once. I call that harm reduction. Second, there are tax incentives for investing in accessibility. So talk to your financial advisor, talk to your tax attorney, talk to whomever you talk to. It's the IRS, so it's a convoluted formula that I'm not even going to try to explain here because I don't really understand it. But the tax incentives do exist, and they will help you in your investment in accessibility. There are also, in some cases, grants that can be gotten. A lot of them are local, they change, often. And what you may or may not qualify for really depends on your situation. So if you become a real life access client, that's one of the things that we can do. We can help you research those grants. So the other issue that people are often concerned about is that accessibility is hard. Accessibility is a difficult undertaking. And again, sometimes it is. When you have to reinstall an elevator, or when you have to install an elevator because your building doesn't have one, that's hard. It's expensive. It's all the things. But in most cases, accessibility can be achieved far easier than people think. Most accessibility fixes that we can make are actually quite simple. And then there's the topic of third-party software. Okay, the bane of all our existence, right? Because as a business owner, if you purchase software, be it customer facing or employee facing, that is inaccessible, you're responsible both legally and in the court of public opinion. Now, in my opinion, that's unfair, but not by your hand, but in your lap, as a wise person once said. but you have more power than you think. You can use your purse, your pocketbook, to pressure third-party vendors into making their products accessible. And as if you become a real life access client, we'll help you do that. Now, speaking of real life access, I wasn't going to do it yesterday, but I did. I announced the big group coaching cohort. Now, it's going to be starting next month, sometime the week after Labor Day. Kathleen, if you could just post the link to that in the chat if you haven't already.
I am doing it right now.
Awesomeness, awesomeness. It is based on the 3 categories of accessibility that I discussed Monday and yesterday. Those 3 categories are physical accessibility, which is the accessibility of everything that you touch or move through. Digital accessibility, which is the accessibility of everything that comes to you electronically. And cultural accessibility, which is the belief throughout your organization that difference is ordinary. That when somebody with a disability applies for a job, comes into your store, buys your product, it's really no big deal. If they need help, we'll help them. If they don't, then we won't. It's just par for the course. So the group coaching, and in the group coaching cohort, we're going to take a business, a fictional business, and we're going to solve its accessibility challenges. And it has a few, but we're going to solve them, and we're going to apply that. If you joined us, we're going to apply those fixes. We're going to translate that knowledge to accessibility challenges that are unique to your company. Now, if you sign up for this cohort, you get, and here's the sales pitch. Wait for it. You get 4 coaching sessions, group coaching sessions, 75 to 90 minutes long, depending on how many questions people have. You get access to my physical accessibility course, and you get an hour of consultation with me, one-on-one consultation with me. And that group coaching cohort right now is $700. It won't always be that way. I'm going to raise the price at some point, but right now it's $797. It's going to be $797 at least through the end of August. So,
And Angela, we put the link in the chat, and there's a lot of great detail on the website that you have. Yeah. And for folks that have questions about the group coaching cohort, your accessibility basics boot camp, they can reach out to you in email. Is that your preferred?
it is. You can reach out to me on by email at angela@reallifeaccess.com. You can also message me on LinkedIn. You can do that as well. So if you and I are LinkedIn buddies, just and that's easier for you, just find me and message me.
And so, Angela, you were also speaking about, thank you for this. And we've got everything in the chat, all the links and the websites and everything. What are some common questions that people have? We talked a lot about finances and investment, that individuals, if they're looking to get their projects approved, what are some things that people are looking for? We talked about grants yesterday. We talked about putting together proposals and all kinds of things. What are, in your experience, what has worked for people to have more accessibility options? What's worked for you with the clients that you have in your experience? What's worked? What's working now?
Well, people need to know the benefits of accessibility. People need to know both the business case and the real human impact. Now, the business case, simply stated, accessible companies make more money. The buying
Mhm,
power of people
absolutely.
with disabilities overall is over $2 trillion. That's trillion with a T. I don't even know how many zeros that is, guys. I can't fathom that kind of money, okay? But that's the buying power of people with disabilities. And not only that, but if a company is accessible, we're going to encourage our friends to go too. You know, our family, our friends, our co-workers. And conversely, if a company is inaccessible, then we're going to talk people into going somewhere else. Um, Mostly out of sheer annoyance because it's not accessible, right? I mean, if you tried to order a pizza and you couldn't do it, you'd be pretty ticked off too. So there is a business case. Accessible companies make more money, but that doesn't really mean anything until you see the real human impact. What the heck is accessible anyway? So Tuesday, I played for you a screen reader demo that I recorded. And I found that when people see how blind people use a computer and why things need to be made accessible, it becomes real for them. They get it. The light goes on. And here's the thing, guys. In the vast majority of cases, people aren't trying to be inaccessible. Nobody wakes up and says, how can I make the blind girl's life miserable today? Okay, that just doesn't happen. Accessibility is born of simple ignorance. People don't know, and that's where real life access comes in, right? I'm here to teach. I'm not here to judge. We're an accessibility without judgment company. So you're not going to hear any of those judgy words that you might hear in other places. Um, you're gonna hear facts. You're gonna hear why accessibility is so important. And the screen reader demo was a really powerful tool. People ask me, you know, I'm all in. I'm all in, Angela, but how do I convince my boss? And the boss needs to know how accessibility is going to benefit them. If they're not acquainted with somebody with a disability, and believe it or not, most people aren't. You know, it's a little bit shocking for me, right? Because I've been totally blind all my life. I've got blind friends scattered all over the country. You know, I attend a convention most years that has, 3,000 blind people in it. You know, I'm surrounded by blind people, right? But that's not the majority of people. I was having a Walmart order delivered the other day. And most of my stories involve my son because he's brutally honest with me, right? And most people hesitate. Most people aren't brutally honest. Jefferson is brutally honest. I tell people he's my harshest critic because he's my biggest fan. So I'm having this Walmart order delivered, and it contained alcohol. If you know me, you know I love a beer every now and again. So I had to sign the app on the driver's phone so I could get the beer. And the driver froze, didn't know what to do. And it had been a long day. I was tired, crabby, and I wanted a beer. So I said, Jefferson, could you please help us with this? That we need someone to bridge this communication gap we're having right now. So he came out and he did. And I walked in with the groceries and I was kind of shaking my head like, wow, that was what was that about? I mean, and Jefferson said, Mom, the guy probably never met a blind person before. What? What do you mean he's never met a blind person before? There's blind people everywhere. No, they're not. No, there's not. Aside from you, I've only seen one or two other blind people. So, besides the people I introduced you to, of course. So it really, it struck me that my perspective on life is so different from most other people's perspective on life. And therein lies the problem, right? We think, oh, the ADA has been a thing for, 30 years, however long it's been a thing. People should know. No, they shouldn't, because it's not a part of their experience. They don't know. They just don't know. And that's what real life is all about. Real life access is all about. It's about teaching accessibility. So I have been
Yeah. And Angela,
continue.
I also think you're pointing out for all of us, raising our awareness that the logistics and the training and development opportunity for that delivery that you received, really there's an opportunity there for some additional coaching and mentorship for employees, and raising the awareness of accessibility for the entire supply chain.
And one of the crucial things that real life access offers is accessibility training. So if you're sitting here thinking, how do I teach these folks? How do I do this? That's a service that real life access can offer for your company.
And Angela, for folks that maybe missed our first day, Daniel will be talking about accessibility in the law here in just a moment. Would you go review also, and we'll get the conversation going too, is your three types of accessibility? Your
Sure.
three kinds of accessibility, yeah.
Right. So I went over them very briefly when I was discussing the coaching cohort, and I probably went through them too fast. Um, there are three categories of accessibility that real life access has identified. The first is physical accessibility, which is the accessibility of everything that you can touch or move through. The good old wheelchair ramp, right? I mean, that is a textbook example of physical accessibility. But also, somebody brought up yesterday something as simple as moving the hanger in your closet down to a level where you can actually reach it. Gentlemen, take heed, right? I mean, not everybody's 6'5". Um, that's part of physical accessibility. Environmental things, I use the example of super loud music at an event that, is, I've seen it where it's so loud that the quality is actually distorted. You, that music is not that's not a good time. That's a headache, okay, for the majority of people. And for people who are hard of hearing, it can be very disorienting. So that's physical accessibility. The next category is digital accessibility, the accessibility of everything that comes to you electronically. The website is the textbook example of digital accessibility. And I've been working in the digital space, so most of my analogies, my readily accessible analogies, are going to have to do with digital accessibility. Websites, email, social media, the memes and giffies or whatever the heck they are that are posted on social media are oftentimes inaccessible um, because they're not adequately described. um, Advertising. A lot of times when I see an advertisement, I have no idea what's being advertised. I mean, that kind of defeats the purpose. You want me to buy your product, right? Let me know what you're selling me. you know, but people don't think of that. They don't. We live in a visual world. People think visually. Um, The next, the last category of accessibility is cultural accessibility. And it's harder to define, but it is oh so critical because it has to do with your attitude. It has to do with your mindset. When a blind person applies to work at your company or walks into a store to buy your product, Is that a crisis or is that just an ordinary event? And when it's an ordinary event, when we accept the fact that, hey, there's going to be people coming that are different, then we change things, we adjust things so that they are more accessible. Maybe we turn down the music at those live events. Maybe we make sure that our videos are captioned and that things are described. Maybe we make sure that our speakers use a microphone. But we do these things naturally because people are different. Different people have different needs.
Right. Right.
It's just life. So I think we're getting pretty close to the bottom of the hour. Is Dan here?
He is not here yet. And why don't we also why don't we get some participation here from folks?
Yeah, I
And
was just gonna say the same thing. Let's get some
do that.
chat. Let's
Yeah,
get some chat
exactly. Yeah.
participation
Yeah.
here. Does anybody have anything that they wanna, any questions, any shares?
And also, we're curious, Angela and I, about how have you been impacted by any of the three types of accessibility: physical, digital, cultural? Because Angela, you are raising people's awareness here and getting people to take action on this. Because our first day was, and the first second day was to look around, literally and figuratively, and see where there are opportunities for more physical, digital, or cultural accessibility. And so we'd love to get your voices in here in our webinar here. What's been your experience? Just go ahead, jump in, unmute yourself, raise your hand, whatever works for you. You can use the reactions button at the bottom of the page. Jump in. Love to, Sarah, get your voice in here, and Laura and Martha and Marnie and Hala, Matthew, other folks. Yeah. What's been your experience with the three different types of accessibility? Yeah. Yeah. Matthew,
I've
please
had
jump in. Yeah.
experience with a lot of physical accessibility challenges. So at a previous job and a company that I volunteer and work with, we would host events for pediatric patient families.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them had physical disabilities, whether it was being in a wheelchair or, in a walker. We had a couple patients that were blind. And when we pick an event venue, we would encounter a lot of challenges where, the venue itself wasn't very accessible, couldn't open up certain doorways to let people in if they couldn't take stairs, or some simply didn't have elevators. And so, Angela, like you were saying, it just eliminated any possibility of us doing business with them.
And if you and that does two things, right? And that speaks so eloquently and in such a real way to the business case for accessible, because you're going to take your business to event venues that are accessible, and
Well,
those folks are going to
yeah.
get your money.
Mm-hmm. And then anyone who liked the venue would also go back, and they would bring their families, and so it was repeat business, and it was entire opportunities that they never would have had if they weren't accessible for the venues that we did end up choosing.
And all the things involved in events, right? Food, catering. I mean, they probably make you buy food from them. They don't, that's the way these event centers operate. So we're talking about a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. And even just accessibility with the food as well. In terms of being conscious of different dietary restrictions. A lot of event venues won't allow, like you were saying, outdoor food. And so it's a challenge, because if someone is on a restrictive diet, they're entirely excluded.
And making sure that people can know what they're putting on their plate, what's in the food, so that they can pick foods that are, okay with their diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the physical, and then for the dietary, those are complete non-starters if the venues doesn't fit into the specific criteria.
Yep. Yep.
Matthew, such great sharing. Thank you. And we can really hear your commitment and your concern and your caring. So thank you. You're a real
Absolutely.
advocate of accessibility. Great to have you with us. Thank you. Yes. And so, Daniel, you have just come in and we want to hear about accessibility in the law. So come on in, Daniel.
All right. Dan Hodges is he graduated from the University of Baltimore Law School. He runs a nationwide nonprofit, which he started while he was in law school during COVID. He is a wealth of knowledge about disability law and how it impacts small businesses and nonprofits. So I'm going to give him about 20 minutes here to speak on disability law and let you know how disability law impacts your business. And I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to let him go ahead and take it away.
Awesome, and it's great to be here. And it was funny, a couple of days ago, Angela and I were talking about the key points and trying to condense this down. And it occurred to me that while there are several laws that touch accessibility in some way, shape, or form, all of them have 4 common elements that can be broken down a little bit further and applied in a way that provides some sort of security and also drives innovation. So that's what we're going to focus on today, is understanding those 4 elements, and then we can build on that at a later point. So Kathleen, if you want to bring up the first slide, if you haven't already. The first element is, what is the objective? And this really looks at whether it's a job, whether it's wanting to buy something online. It's determining what the purpose of the activity is. The second question is, what is essential? And this comes from a term of art from the ADA and other laws that are referenced as having essential job functions. So in an employment context, if you want to be a truck driver, it's essential to be able to operate a vehicle safely. It may or may not be essential to be able to go long periods of time without, say, taking an injection for diabetes, which is also another covered accommodation. The third question is, what is reasonable? So again, we have the other side of the coin here. You can reasonably figure out a way for a truck driver with diabetes to make sure that they are getting food when they need to keep their blood glucose in the right, within the right parameters. You can look at scheduling things to keep that on track with some minor modifications. You can't, however, modify the job to such a degree that a person who cannot operate a vehicle safely can go be a successful truck driver. Sorry, Angela, you're not becoming a truck driver anytime soon. And the fourth is the accommodation achievable? And this one really comes down to a doctrine from the Americans with Disabilities Act and other laws that make sure that a requested accommodation does not cross the line into being unduly burdensome for the business. So if you are staying with the trucking story here, if you are running a tight schedule of short deliveries, it may be slightly harder to modify that schedule than, say, somebody who's driving long haul, where you have, various points along the way over the course of several hours or days where you can break things up, as opposed to a very tight schedule that might require more intricate tweaking. So I'm going to pause here for a second to see if there's any questions before I dive a little bit deeper into these concepts and tell you how they apply to businesses.
Please.
Well, I'm disappointed. I was looking forward to driving long haul across the United States. Doggone it. I tell people I can drive just fine. It's the seeing where I'm going part that's the problem.
There you go.
So folks, feel free, unmute yourself, raise your hand, use the reactions button at the bottom if you'd like to raise your hand. And if you have questions about accessibility and the law, Dan, how would you phrase this, kind of in a bigger topic?
I would say that really and truly, it's a matter of trying to find accessibility at its best. Borrows from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, in the sense of accessibility at its best is creating a win-win proposition. So I think that's where the reasonableness comes into play. That's also where the undue burden, or as I would like to switch it, undue burden is a double negative. That's not only questionable grammatically, but it really puts a very, it introduces a scarcity mindset into the equation that probably doesn't need to be there. A much more helpful way to look at it is, what is the achievability of implementing a certain accommodation or accessibility feature? On the customer facing side, if you're in a physical store and you've got a tight budget and you've just happened to inherit a building that probably should have had a ramp and doesn't, it's going to be a lot more burdensome to do that than it will be if you're looking to put in, say, braille signage, which is a lot less expensive, or an automatic door, and you've got a higher budget. So there's a lot of give and take here, saying, okay, in a perfect world, yes, the world would be designed so that everyone can access it equally. But the reality of the matter is that the world is highly inaccessible, and forcing businesses to comply at the risk of that business going under really isn't the purpose of the law, and it's not the purpose of the broader accessibility movement, because we want to have places to shop, we want to have places that'll employ us, and that's not going to happen if we're preaching compliance to the point where it is causing businesses to lay people off or close their doors. And I'm also going to put another needle in this and say that the accessibility landscape, you may have heard, is always changing. While the laws such as the ADA have been in place for 34 years, some laws have been in place longer. There hasn't been a major amendment to the ADA in a couple of administrations. Actually, I think about 3 administrations. I think the last one was during the George W. Bush administration, which, not to be political, but just to show how long it goes between alterations. That is true. However, the case law, or how the law is interpreted, is changing drastically and can be interpreted at in different ways in different parts of the country. So that is why Real Life Access and my nonprofit Pieces of Me Foundation we teach universal design and looking forward to creating solutions that work, knowing that they are going to weather any kind of regulatory climate, as opposed to other alternatives that are looking at strict compliance and may require pretty significant alterations down the line as the law changes. So that's one of the key takeaways is, universal design is going to clear the compliance hurdle by a good margin. It's going to be much more dynamic as opposed to compliance, which is not going to have those same benefits and is subject to different interpretations of the laws and doesn't really take into account the overall user experience the way that we wish it should. And the final thing I want to point out too that a lot of people don't know is that if you go to your average contract or business lawyer on the streets, the odds that they have a wide-ranging understanding of disability law and how it connects to their field of law are unfortunately quite slim. The level of awareness that I had in my legal education, that just concluded slightly over 3 years ago, was very, very low. It was only a couple of cases here and there, not nearly enough to prepare businesses or lawyers to help businesses navigate adequately and effectively serving what is the world's largest minority. So that's a case where you want to have some good legal help, but you also want to be working with people like Angela, who are designers at heart, who are always staying ahead of the compliance and regulatory curve, because that's going to be the best way to not only not avoid getting sued, but I think more importantly, create the kind of experience you want every one of your customers, every one of your employees to have.
So Dan, can I say in the great majority of cases, if you strive for accessibility, the law will take care of itself?
Absolutely.
Then
Now,
again, go ahead.
Oh, that's right. And Daniel, Martha has a question in the chat. Martha, if you'd like to unmute, feel free to jump in. Yeah, great point of view. Hey, isn't this all about accessibility, that we all have the access to ask questions and get the conversation going? So thank you, Martha.
Hey, I'm Martha, and I know Angela from working with her at the VA. And it's funny because if you go to section 508.gov, they take this universal design point of view, which I do not like, because it implies like there's some kind of like medium. And I have found in my career and some of the successes we've had at VA, like obsessive thinking about accessibility first and actually optimizing for that experience, as opposed to some kind of generic medium universal. Like when you focus on this use case first, like the design just gets better for everybody. So maybe it's, like I said, maybe it's a distinction without a difference, but personally, and as a designer, this idea of this universal design has never resonated with me and some of the successes I've seen. So
I think it's a really important distinction. And so I should have clarified what I meant by universal design. So I'm glad you brought this up and you're giving me a chance to clarify.
Yeah.
Because when I use the term universal design, I'm looking at capturing the full range of experiences, so that it is, the basic product, product or service or function is available to as many people as possible with as little friction as possible. That is distinctly different from, like you said, the one size fits all that has honestly led us down the path to where things involving accessibility or othered, in the first place. So yeah, we may use different terminology, but we absolutely agree on the point that yes, accessibility should be a primary consideration. It should be something that is, within the forefront of the design process, and definitely breaking away from anything that reeks of one size fits all.
Awesome, thanks.
There's a reason that seats in cars and the cockpits of airplanes are adjustable, right? Because they tried that. They tried to design one seat for the average person. It fit nobody.
Yep.
So yeah, and it's interesting because I always interpreted universal design as meaning design so that it's as accessible and user friendly as possible to as many people as possible. I didn't, I didn't equate universal design with one size fits all, but it's certainly when accessibility advocates use the term universal design, we mean design that of which accessibility is a key thread, even a linchpin.
Unfortunately, it's just not taught in design school that way, as I found.
You're right about that.
Yeah.
And that is, yeah, and that's one of the key. I said before that lack of access is born of ignorance. They don't teach universal design in the sense of accessibility first, universal design, nor do they teach accessible coding in most
Right.
coding curriculums. And that is something, if your web developer is putting out inaccessible stuff, he probably just doesn't know.
Yeah, I mean, I heard a really good talk about this from the Access Board once. Like, even the way that in universities you get the accessibility class senior year as a developer, like implying you do it at the end. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you've ever replaced a faucet in an older home, you know that retrofitting is an exercise in frustration and futility.
Yeah, Martha, thank you. Really great
Yeah.
discussion. And Marnie has a question, Daniel, in the chat. And what she is asking is, she's currently transitioning from a digital design role, and of course you, Angela, this is for you too, at a private company to a civic tech position within the government. And her question is, are there differences in the law between private and public entities?
Yes. Theoretically, there are much more stringent protections in place going into the public sector. Now, I could spend another hour discussing whether or not the theory is actually borne out in reality, but there are certainly additional laws and regulations in place that should help you aid in that transition.
Great.
Generally speaking, when you work for the public sector, the law is stronger. When you work for the private sector, the business case is stronger. Generally speaking.
I would look into, what is it? I think Schedule A employments, and I would also the applicable law that is going to be of service for any accommodations you might need is the Rehab Act of '73. It actually predates the ADA by 17 years, and it has much more stringent protections, holding the federal government accountable for being a model employer.
So Dan, you mentioned the federal government. Does that also apply to state and local governments?
In a lot of ways, yes. It's a little bit more convoluted legally, but yeah, there's, any way you slice it, there's more protection. Because again, state governments are also supposed to be model employers.
And if something receives federal funding, so say your company contracts with the federal government, to what extent are they affected by the Rehabilitation Act, Section 508 specifically, I think, right?
Again, in theory, according to the letter of the law, quite a bit. You know, according to reality, it's a work in progress.
And this is why the law is so frustrating, right? This is why I stick to accessible design, because the law gives me a headache. But you guys need to know this stuff. We need to have these conversations.
Angela and Daniel, another quick question. You know, for folks that are consultants, trainers, perhaps they're even were in organizations, and we know we have an accessibility sensitivity mindset, and we see things happening, whether they're at a store that we go to, or it's an employer, it's a workplace, it's a business, wherever it is, and we know there's accessibility issues for folks. What's a good next step for people to take? What do we do, whether we're an employee of a company or we're actually just a consumer out in the world, you know, a human being out in the world? What do we do about this? How do we increase accessibility and also accountability?
I love that question. And Angela hates it when I use this phrase, so she's going to yell at me for this later. But I'm going to start off by saying it really starts by being a good ally. And what that means in this sense is things that demonstrate that even if you're not personally affected, you still care. So whether it's, you know, flagging down a manager at a store and saying, hey, I noticed this and this doesn't personally affect me, but I still care and I want you to know this impacts my choices as a consumer. Whether it's, you know, interacting with a company's social media team or other ways that respectfully and kindly but firmly say, you know, I'm not talking about, you know, necessarily talking about picketing. I'm not talking about threatening to bomb the place. I'm nothing, none of that stuff. I'm saying, go on to their Facebook page and say, hey, I noticed this is a problem, and I want you to know that we see it and that we care and that we're with we're with the disabled community and wanting to make sure that they have an equitable experience. I think that is the biggest thing we would want to see happen from our non-disabled friends.
Yeah, it's advocacy and communication, and I think we know as human beings we've got a lot of experience into some of the three things that Angela was mentioning earlier about accessibility, you know, the three different kinds of accessibility, and the physical, the digital, and the cultural. When is the right time, Daniel, to engage with an attorney?
I would say, generally speaking, the right time to engage with an attorney is toward the very end of the process. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is by virtue of the fact that it's expensive. Also, it's a very blunt tool in the sense that if you end up, you know, filing a suit, you have no way of knowing what direction it's going to go, and that's assuming you can even find an attorney that will take the case. Because I can tell you, and Angela can confirm this, it is not nearly as easy to get someone to represent you in an accessibility case as people think it is. And this is coming from somebody who has a lot of friends that are lawyers and still can tell you it's just hard. Now, what are some of the steps that, you know, before engaging an attorney? Again, you know, open communication. You know, does the business have a complaint process? Does the business have a feedback mechanism where you can engage in civil, respectful but yet informative dialogue. Failing that, or you know, if that doesn't render the fruits you want, I'm a mediator. I did more focus in law school on mediation than I did litigation, where I had the opportunity. So I'm a big fan of mediation or other forms of alternative dispute, arbitration, structured negotiation, that sort of thing. And the reasons for that are twofold. A, it's a lot more cost effective for everybody involved, and B, it introduces the ability to be creative. So there's the ability to identify where the problem lies, and both parties have a vested interest in coming to the table to figure out how to fix it as effectively, as expeditiously, and as inexpensively as possible. So yeah, going to court it's always an available option, but it's one that comes toward the very end of the chain.
And in most cases, and again, there's going to be, hard cases that, maybe there's no other option. But in the vast majority of cases, mediation and negotiation and training work. Sometimes just simply pointing it out, and I like the term advocate. If you see something that's not accessible, and you let the business know, hey, this is a problem. People with disabilities can't use this, and this is why it matters. Then sometimes that's all it takes, especially with smaller companies. But the one thing that I would say that is, find somebody, if possible, find somebody with power, with some degree of influence, because you go to a website, and I'm speaking as a blind person, not necessarily not as an advocate here. You go to a website and the website is inaccessible, so you get mad. Why wouldn't you? Because you want to accomplish a simple task and you can't do it, so you're ticked off. And so you call customer service, and if you're anything like I was in my younger years, maybe you're not very friendly to customer service. But that accomplishes nothing, because what can the customer service rep do, right? They can escalate it to another customer service rep that can't do anything. But what can they, what can they really do? I got into this business because I realized that, and working with the VA actually is really where I came to realize this. The people that have the ability to affect change, the managers, the designers, the developers, the people that are actually working on the product, the product folks, want to do the right thing in the great majority of cases. But because, like I said, accessibility is born of ignorance, they might not even know that there's a right thing to do, let alone what that right thing is. So, if we can find some way to talk, to skip over the customer, and again, I know it sounds daunting, doesn't it? You're probably having chatbot nightmares right now. But if we can find some way to skip over those layers and talk to somebody that really has some influence, and if we can teach and educate them, that is where we're going to make a difference.
Angela, fantastic. And we're now at the top of the hour. Daniel Hodges, great, important topics. Thank you for bringing all these up in such a fantastic, easy to understand and easy to absorb kind of way. You're really a no-nonsense kind of guy. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Angela, do you want to wrap up here? We're at the top of the hour, and we've got our wrap up tomorrow with bringing it all together and next steps. Tomorrow, same time.
Come back tomorrow. We're going to review everything, but we're going to talk a little bit about real life access and what exactly my company. Hello, buddy. What exactly my company can do for you. So come on back tomorrow, 8 Pacific, 11 Eastern. The replay of today is going to be available shortly. We are going to let y'all go because time flies when you're having fun, and I know y'all got places to go and things to do and people to see. So this concludes day 3.
Fantastic. Bye for now. Thanks, Angela. Bye, Daniel. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Meeting tab selected.